You mentioned you didn't care for the real estate business. Did you move on after that, or did
Yes.
you?
Yes, I moved my family to Galena, Illinois. My father had a tannery shop there, so I worked for my father there. And then in a short time, with newspaper articles we've been reading, it was obvious there was going to be a war shortly. And after the firing up on Fort Sumter, I decided I wanted to go back into the military. And the governor of Illinois, he assigned me to a regiment in Mattoon, Illinois. And from there, we were transferred back to southeast Missouri.
Tell me about one of your first Civil War battles in Florida, Missouri.
That was a very beginning of a learning experience that stuck with me all the way through the war. I can remember with my troops marching down a narrow dirt road, and I got reports that there was Confederate contingency in front of me. I had no clue exactly what the numbers were, but I knew that we had to proceed on. And I can remember I wanted to not show the men that I was definitely concerned. We had to proceed on. And I can remember my heart felt like it was going to beat on my chest because I just didn't know what was going to happen in front. But I kept moving. And everything was going through my mind, my family. Am I going to be able to come back after this? And the instance you're talking about, we rode up and the Confederacy has already left the camp, finding out that that commander was more scared than I was. So I used that all through the war during the Civil War, with that on my mind, that man across the battlefield was thinking and the same concerns as I always had.
Tell me a little bit about Fort Donelson.
Oh, Fort Donelson. I finally talked into the commander here in St. Louis, General Hallock, that the best thing to do is take the Mississippi River, and one of the first defense was Fort Donelson. We took Fort Henry first and then Fort Donelson. Fort Donelson was the first time in U.S. history that I know of that I worked with actually our Navy on the river. And we timed it when we were going to attack with our watches. We synchronized our watches and we hit at the same time. And Fort Donelson fell quite fast at the time. I knew then that we had the manpower and we had the commandership to proceed on down through the Mississippi River.
Did you get along with General Halleck?
You know, at the beginning, I thought he was pretty much on my side and all. Fort Donelson, as you were talking about, I knew that we had to take that fortification as soon as we could. Everything was lined up. We had the ships on the Tennessee River there, the guns pointed towards Fort Donelson. We knew that if we didn't attack, they would abandon that fortification, and we wanted to catch the resistance as best we could. I sent orders back here to St. Louis and waited for almost 4 weeks, and General Hallock still would not report back what to do. I took it up on myself, and we attacked. In just a short time of an hour and a half, we took that fortification and all. As your question of General Hallock, I hate to comment negative on people, but at the time I didn't realize it, but there was some jealousy on my command ship. And he actually wanted to command the troops out in the field, and that wasn't the wish at the time of President Lincoln. So even though I didn't realize it at the time at Fort Donelson and thought he was working with me as best he could, he was actually working against me.
It has been rumored that you have a drinking problem. Is there any truth to that?
Well, you remember I was just talking about, you asked me about General Hallock and him being somewhat jealous. I went up and commanded pretty fast as a general and all. So there was a lot of resentment from other commanders of me getting so large commands so fast and all. But I think I could answer that question by saying, at the time that I became commander of all the armies of the U.S., and at the time the U.S. government is almost in bankruptcy because this war lasted so long. We're practically losing the war. If I was a drunkard or even an alcoholic, do you think the President of the United States would trust me with the lives of all these men in command against Robert E. Lee and Jeff Davis? No, sir. No, sir. Nobody could report that I was ever drunk on a battlefield.
You mentioned Robert E. Lee. Tell me how you felt when General Lee surrendered to you.
That was at Appomattox, Virginia. I can remember that day I had a severe headache. And sometimes people thought that I was drinking when I had those headaches. And I took off riding on Cincinnati. It was one of my favorite thoroughbreds. My staff trying to keep up with me just to shake this headache that I have. And a report came in that the Army of Northern Virginia was wanting surrender. Robert E. Lee wanted terms. I told my staff to find a place in Appomattox that I could meet Robert E. Lee, and they did. And I can remember that day as I'm riding towards the place that they said that we would meet. I noticed that I was quite muddy. Been riding that day, having a lot of rain during that period and all. My boots were muddy. And as I was walking up the steps, I was thinking, this is totally disrespectful, but this is all I have. And as I walked up into that room, I saw Robert E. Lee in a fine uniform, and my eyes caught the saber that he was carrying. And I apologized actually to him. I said, Robert E. Lee, you look fine, but I have to apologize the way I look today. And General Lee, I remember, said, this is the only uniform I had left that was clean. It was given by the people in Richmond. We sat down and started talking, and we started talking about the Mexican War. And he had a higher command. You know, Robert E. Lee was in the U.S. Army at the time. And as we started talking, I says, General Lee, I do remember one time you rode by during the Mexican War. And he said, General, I remember you, if he did or not, or just being polite. And we had chit-chat that day. And finally, Robert E. Lee said, General, you know what we're here for, talking to me. And I said, yes, we are. I asked for a pen and paper, started writing out the terms and all. General Lee looked at it. I could see there was concern. And he said, General, he says, my army is different than your army. All the mules and horses belong to the men, not to the government. They need these to plow when they get back home. And that's the only time that I ever made a change in the surrender. Usually it's been an unconditional surrender, nothing else accepted. But I accepted that. We signed the papers. Robert E. Lee walked out that day, and I can remember I thought that he's already has mounted his horse. His horse is called Traveler. And I accidentally walked out and faced him. And he looked at me while he was mounted as I was standing on the ground, and he saluted, and I saluted back. I knew then that now we were the United States of America.
A few years after the Civil War, Grant was elected the 18th President of the United States of America and served 2 terms. Grant finished writing his memoirs days before dying from throat cancer on July 23, 1885. His body lies in New York City with that of his wife in Grant's tomb, the largest mausoleum in North America.